This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter, something procedural, something that only matters if you understand how power actually moves. While attention was pulled towards spectacle, a legal switch was flipped, not loudly, not emotionally, just efficiently. A decision was made that told courts to step back, that told contracts to wait, that told money where it was allowed to go and where it was not. That decision did not protect people. It protected a process. And once you see that process, you start noticing how often it appears right after moments of chaos, right after urgency is declared, right after the public stops looking closely. If this sounds abstract, stay with me. Because this mechanism doesn't live overseas, it reaches into markets, into prices, into the systems you depend on without thinking about them. If you want to understand why certain outcomes suddenly become inevitable, keep watching, because this isn't the end of the story. It's the setup. When people look for power, they usually look in the wrong place. They look at speeches. They look at elections. They look at personalities. But real control rarely announces itself. What actually runs the system is not who speaks the loudest. It's who decides what cannot be touched. Money feels free until it isn't. Law feels neutral until it pauses. There is a layer beneath politics where decisions are framed as temporary, technical, or emergency. That layer doesn't debate values. It manages risk. And when that layer activates, entire outcomes become preloaded. Markets adjust before you're told why. Investments become safe before the situation looks stable. Certain losses are quietly absorbed, while other interests are sealed off from harm. This is how order is imposed without explanation. Not by force alone, by design. Once this switch exists, it doesn't need to be justified every time. It just needs the right moment. And the moment always looks the same. What comes next is where most people lose the thread, because the change doesn't feel like change at all. The most dangerous shifts don't arrive as shocks. They arrive as habits. There was a time when emergency powers were rare, short-lived, embarrassing even, something governments rush to explain and then roll back. Now they arrive with templates. Before, courts were obstacles. Now they are variables. Before, contracts were enforced unless broken. Now they are enforced, unless inconvenient. Nothing announces this change. No press conference explains it. It just becomes normal to hear that something is paused, ring-fenced, or temporarily exempt. Temporary stretches, exemptions stack, and slowly, predictability migrates away from law and toward power. This is how systems evolve without votes, without debate, without you being asked. And because it happens incrementally, it feels responsible, prudent, even boring. Until the moment you realize the rules you thought were fixed only apply when they don't interfere with something larger. That realization usually comes late, after positions are locked in, after consequences are already moving. And that's where this starts to get concrete. Then the quiet system produces a noise, not chaos, not collapse. A jolt, a single decision interrupts what was supposed to be automatic. Claims that were expected to move forward suddenly stop. Money that should flow freezes in place. On paper, nothing dramatic has happened. No law was overturned. No verdict reversed. Instead, an exception appears. A declaration. Limited in scope, unlimited in effect. It doesn't cancel obligations. It suspends them. It doesn't erase risk. It relocates it. Creditors wait. Courts pause. Markets read between the lines. And almost immediately, something else happens. Meetings are scheduled. Commitments are announced. Large numbers are spoken aloud with confidence that didn't exist days earlier. This is the tell. Because stability is being promised before it exists. Certainty is being priced in before anything has settled. And the people absorbing the uncertainty are not the ones being reassured. That imbalance is not accidental. It's the signal that the mechanism has fully engaged. And once it does, it doesn't disengage easily. Here's the part that rarely gets explained. When emergency authority activates, it doesn't just protect assets, it reorganizes responsibility. Loss doesn't disappear. It moves. Legal claims don't vanish. They are deferred into the future, where their value quietly decays. The system works by creating a protected core and an exposed perimeter. Inside the core, capital is stabilized. Time is bought. Risk is neutralized. Outside the core, everyone else absorbs the delay. Creditors wait without interest. Public institutions shoulder uncertainty. Populations live with the consequences of decisions they didn't make. This isn't corruption in the traditional sense. It's architecture. Because once money is insulated at the center, new agreements become possible. Deals that would have been too risky yesterday suddenly make sense. Investments that required confidence now have it manufactured, but effective. And the beauty of the system is that it looks lawful. Every step is signed. Every clause cites authority. Nothing appears stolen. But control has already shifted from courts to executives, from rules to discretion, from outcomes to intentions. And once discretion replaces enforcement, the next phase arrives quickly. That's when the tempo changes. This is where things accelerate. Decisions compress. Timelines shrink. What once took years happens in weeks. Agreements appear fully formed. Numbers are large. Language is confident. Security is mentioned. Stability is assumed. The word transition does a lot of work. Meanwhile, nothing fundamental has been resolved. Ownership is unclear. Legitimacy is provisional. Institutions is still fragile, but movement continues anyway. Because delay is now dangerous, not for everyone, but for the process itself. Momentum must be maintained. Expectations must not collapse. So uncertainty is reframed as opportunity. Risk is called first mover advantage. Speed becomes virtue. At this stage, questioning feels inappropriate. Even unpatriotic. After all, something is finally being done. But watch closely. The faster everything moves, the narrower the path becomes. Fewer exits. Less room to adjust. This is the point where outcomes begin to harden. Not officially, functionally. And once they do, reversal becomes almost impossible because the system is no longer reacting. It's committing. Here's where this stops being abstract. Because you don't experience systems, you experience results. You see it when prices move before explanations arrive. When volatility shows up without a headline big enough to justify it, when something you rely on becomes suddenly uncertain and no one can tell you for how long. You feel it if your savings are exposed to markets that reprice risk overnight. If your job depends on supply chains that assume stability where there isn't any yet. If your legal protections exist until they don't. This is what happens when discretion replaces predictability. The rules still exist. They're just no longer guaranteed to apply to you. And the most unsettling part is that none of this requires malice. It only requires priority. If this feels distant, it isn't. Because the same mechanisms that protect large interests redefine what risk looks like for everyone else. If you want to understand why the ground feels less solid lately, pay attention to this layer. It explains more than any speech ever will. Stay with me. Because what this triggers doesn't stop at one system or one country. Once this mechanism activates, it doesn't stay contained. Other systems notice. Other governments watch how exceptions are created and how quickly they work. They draw conclusions. Some respond by aligning closer, hoping to stay inside the protected core. Others move the opposite direction, trying to insulate themselves before they become exposed. This is how fragmentation begins. Quietly, rationally. Trade routes adjust. Financial relationships are reevaluated. Assumptions that once held start to feel conditional. And the most important shift isn't ideological. It's practical. When legal enforcement is shown to be flexible, trust becomes strategic. Deals require more guarantees. Commitments shorten. That pressure ripples outward. Currencies feel it. Commodities feel it. Markets that depend on long-term stability start pricing in shorter horizons. This is no longer local. It's no longer even regional. It's a signal event. And the signal says this: when priorities collide, rules bend. What happens next depends on how often that bending is needed. And that's where the future opens into several very different paths. From here, the system can move in three directions. The first is adjustment. Emergency authority recedes. Temporary measures unwind. Institutions slowly reassert themselves. This path requires restraint. It assumes confidence returns before impatience takes over. It depends on discipline from actors who rarely benefit from slowing down. The second path is erosion. Exceptions remain in place just a little too long. New situations justify similar tools. Each use feels reasonable on its own. Over time, predictability thins, law still exists, but enforcement becomes selective. Risk doesn't explode, it spreads. The third path is rupture. That's when flexibility becomes expectation. When markets stop assuming reversibility. When actors hedge not against outcomes, but against the system itself. In that scenario, trust doesn't vanish overnight. It fractures piece by piece. Capital moves faster. Commitments shorten further. Stability becomes episodic instead of structural. None of these paths announce themselves clearly. They overlap. They borrow from one another. And right now, there is no clear signal which one is winning. Only that movement has begun. And once movement starts at this layer, it rarely stops cleanly.